She was 63, 5'2", wearing a wool coat she'd had since her husband's funeral, and all she wanted was a plate of pasta in the restaurant her family built. The manager, a 26-year-old kid in $800 shoes, looked her up and down like something stuck to the bottom of his foot. "Ma'am, we're fully booked." 3 empty tables sat right behind him. There's a diner 2 blocks down. They do early bird specials. 2 bartenders heard it. 4 servers walked past. Not one opened their mouth. Then a young woman, 27, dark hair pulled back, apron stained from a double shift that started at 5 a.m., stepped forward and said 5 words that'd change everything. "Mrs. Margaret, your table's ready." The manager's jaw tightened. "I didn't seat her." The young woman looked him dead in the eye. "Then I'm seating her. Write me up if you want. She's sitting down." The old woman sat by the window. She ordered bread. 1 bite and her hands went still. It was her husband's recipe, the same one he used to make at 4 a.m. in a bakery that doesn't exist anymore, before the empire, before someone put 3 bullets in his chest in the parking lot of this very building. She almost smiled. Then she heard what the manager said when he thought nobody important was listening, and she stopped chewing. Here's what that manager didn't know. The old woman's name was Margaret Valenti. Her son owns every inch of this building, 12 more restaurants like it, and an empire stretching from Brooklyn to New Jersey, the kind that doesn't show up on any stock exchange, but moves more money in a week than most companies do in a year. Her son's name is Grant Valenti, 37, the most powerful man on the East Coast, and the last person whose mother you'd want to disrespect. But that's not even the twist. The waitress who stood up for her? Katerina Morin. 20 years ago, Margaret's husband ordered the killing of Katerina's father. Katerina knows. She didn't take this job to pay rent. She took it to get inside. She's been here 2 years, watching, writing down every name, every number, every shipment. She came to destroy the Valenti family from the inside out, and she just protected the one woman she was supposed to hate most in this world. That's the thing about revenge. It's simple, until you sit across from an old woman who remembers your dead father's hands covered in flour, and you see your own loneliness looking back at you. This story's got betrayal, a secret that could collapse a criminal empire, and a woman caught between the family that destroyed her and the one she's becoming part of. Hit that like button so more people find this, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe because you don't want to miss what's coming next. Now let's go back to the night Margaret walked into Tavola, because what she found inside was far more dangerous than a rude manager. Margaret left Tavola at 9:15 at night. The young waitress, Katerina, had held the door open for her and said, "Good night, Mrs. Margaret," in a gentle voice, as if Margaret were family. Margaret nodded, stepped out onto the sidewalk, and raised her hand to hail a taxi. A yellow cab pulled in. She sat down in the back seat, closed the door, and then, only then, when no one was watching anymore, she let her hands tremble. She clutched the handbag on her lap, her fingernails pressing into the leather, as if she held it tightly enough, the anger wouldn't spill out. The driver asked for the address. She said, "Upper East Side," in a perfectly normal voice, the kind of voice belonging to a woman who had lived 63 years in a world where swallowing pain wasn't a choice, but a survival skill. The taxi drove past Houston Street, past the Bowery, and up toward the East Side. Margaret looked through the window. Manhattan slid backward beyond the glass, but she saw nothing. She was seeing that boy's face, the way he looked at her, the way he said early bird specials, as if she were something that needed to be cleared out of sight. She had walked into the restaurant her husband built, the place where her husband kneaded dough at 4 o'clock in the morning, the place where she once sat beside the window feeding pasta to her son when he was only 3 years old, and a 26-year-old child wearing $800 shoes had told her to go somewhere else. The taxi stopped in front of the building on 72nd Street. Margaret paid the fare, walked into the lobby, nodded to the doorman, took the elevator up, and entered the apartment. The apartment was quiet in the way. Only places where one person lives can be quiet. Not peaceful, but empty. She didn't turn on the living room lights. She went straight into the kitchen, switched on the small light over the stove, and sat down in the chair where she sat every morning. On the wall opposite her was a framed black and white photograph. Sal Valenti, 30 years old, standing in front of his first bakery in Little Italy, wearing a white apron, flour on his cheek, smiling so wide that the crooked tooth on the left side showed. She looked at the photograph for a long time. Then she picked up the phone and called her son. Grant answered after 2 rings. "Ma? It's late. I know." Silence. The kind of silence between 2 people who love each other deeply enough to know when not to ask and when not to answer. Margaret said, "I went to Tavola tonight." Grant didn't answer right away. His mother hadn't gone to Tavola in 3 years. He had told her not to go alone. She had gone. "How was it?" "The bread's still good." A pause. "But the soul is gone, Grant. Your father would have cried." She said nothing more. She didn't mention the boy managing the place. She didn't mention the words early bird specials. She didn't mention the 6 employees who stood there watching while no one opened their mouth. Margaret Valenti wasn't the kind of woman who told people how she suffered. She was the kind of woman who swallowed it, folded it neatly into a drawer in her mind, and locked it away. But Grant heard what she didn't say. He heard it in the breath between 2 sentences, in the way she paused before the word cried, as if she had almost used another word. He had lived 37 years with this woman. He knew when she was calm because she was truly calm, and when she was calm because, if she weren't calm, someone would have to pay. This was the second kind. "Ma, did something happen?" "Nothing happened. The bread was good. I told you." "Ma, good night, Grant." She hung up. Grant stood at the window of his Tribeca penthouse. The phone still pressed to his ear even though the line had gone dead. Below, Manhattan burned with light. Millions of windows. Millions of people. And not one of them knew that the man standing on the 42nd floor was trying to read his mother's mind through 3 sentences and 2 silences. He lowered the phone, looked at it. Then he called Fletcher. Fletcher answered after 1 ring, his voice alert even though it was nearly 10 o'clock at night. The voice of a man who never truly slept because his work didn't allow it. "Pull everything on Tavola," Grant said. "Every number, every name, every shift. I want to see it myself." A brief silence. Fletcher didn't ask why. He had worked with Grant long enough to know when a question was unnecessary. "How far back?" "Far enough to find whatever my mother won't tell me." The next morning, at 8 o'clock, in the Tribeca penthouse, 3 underbosses sat around the oak table inside Grant's private conference room. The kind of room with no windows, no cameras, nothing but 4 walls and the truth. Each man managed 1 sector. 1 the Brooklyn docks, 1 New Jersey real estate, and 1 the lending network. Grant sat at the head of the table, black coffee in front of him, untouched. He didn't begin with greetings. He asked a single question. "Is there anything in your operations right now that you wouldn't want me to find if I looked?" Silence. The kind of silence that only happens when the man asking doesn't need an answer in words, but an answer in the eyes. Grant looked at each of them. The first man looked back, straight and unblinking. The second swallowed, then nodded. The third opened his mouth as if to say something, but Grant had already moved on. He didn't explain the question, didn't repeat it. The meeting lasted 40 minutes, most of it reports from the 3 men. While Grant listened, nodded, asked a few more details about the port schedule and a real estate contract in Jersey City, then ended with 1 sentence. "If I find something you didn't tell me, this is the last table you'll sit at." The 3 men stood and left through the door. No one said another word in the elevator. That was how Grant Valenti ran things. He didn't shout, didn't slam the table, didn't threaten in a raised voice. He lowered his voice, and everyone in the room understood that the distance between his question and the consequence of a wrong answer was very, very short. Fletcher came into the room right after the last man left, carrying a slim black leather briefcase. He didn't sit until Grant signaled. Then he opened the briefcase and placed 2 stacks of files on the table. "Tavola," Fletcher said. "Left stack is what Conrad's been reporting to you for the last 6 months. Right stack is the actual numbers." Grant pulled both stacks toward him. He opened the one on the left. Revenue steadily rising, profit stable, expenses under control. He opened the one on the right. Actual revenue was 40% lower than reported. 40%. Not a margin of error, not rounding, but a hole. For 6 straight months, Conrad Hale had been sending up clean, polished numbers while the restaurant was bleeding underneath. Grant turned each page, slowly, with the kind of reading done by a man rebuilding a picture from broken pieces. Fletcher continued. Customer reviews. 6 months ago, Tavola sat at 4.7 stars. As of last night, 3.1. He placed another printed stack down, review excerpts highlighted in yellow. Grant read. They weren't reviews about the food. They weren't reviews about the prices. They were about people. About the way customers were treated when they walked in. The same words repeated across dozens of posts like a drumbeat. Hostile, unwelcome, felt like I didn't belong. The manager looked at me like I was trespassing. Grant stopped at one review. A woman had written, "I've been eating here for 15 years. Last month, the young man at the front told me the restaurant was full. I could see empty tables. I'm 61 years old. I just wanted dinner." Grant set the papers down. He said nothing. He stood, walked to the wall behind his desk. The photograph had hung there since the day he moved into this penthouse. The same photograph he had looked at thousands of times. But last night, after his mother's call, it had become different. Big Sal, 30 years old, standing in front of his first bakery in Little Italy, white apron, flour on his hands, smiling wide. Behind him was a wooden door with a handwritten chalk sign. "Everybody eats." Grant remembered one evening when he was 14 years old, sitting in the Tavola kitchen after closing, watching his father wipe down the counter. He asked why his father still kept the restaurant when the other work made 100 times more money. Big Sal stopped wiping, looked at him, and said, "The restaurant isn't a front, son. It's the only real thing we have. Everything else, they can take. The badge, the lawyers, the feds. But this table, this bread, this sauce, this is ours. This is what we leave behind." Grant turned back to the table, sat down, looked at Fletcher. "Build me a cover." "Busboy," transferred from the Brooklyn location. "Name, Jack." Fletcher didn't react right away. He set his hand on the table, choosing his words carefully. "Grant, I can have legal pull the security footage by noon. HR can terminate the manager and anyone involved by end of day. Clean, documented, no exposure. You don't need to set foot in that building. If I fire one manager, I fix one restaurant," Grant said. His voice didn't rise, didn't fall. It was flat as still water before something surfaced from underneath. "I want to know if the whole house is sick." That same night, while Grant Valenti stood in his Tribeca penthouse looking down over Manhattan and ordered Fletcher to tear apart every number tied to Tavola, Katerina Moran was climbing 5 flights of stairs in a walk-up building in Bushwick, Brooklyn. The stairwell was narrow, the paint peeling from the walls, the smell of fried grease from the 3rd floor clinging to her hair every night. She opened the door with 2 turns of the lock, stepped into the studio apartment where, if she stood in the middle of the room and stretched out both arms, she could almost touch both walls. 1 bed, 1 table, 1 electric stove, 1 window looking out at the fire escape, and the brick wall of the building next door. Katerina set her bag down and opened the refrigerator. Inside, a plastic container of cold rice cooked yesterday, half an avocado beginning to brown, and a bottle of water. She ate standing up, without heating the food, without sitting down, chewing slowly while looking at the receipt on the kitchen table. This month, she had sent $400 to Jess, her foster sister, who was in her 2nd year at Rutgers in New Jersey. Jess didn't know where the money came from. Jess thought Kat worked as a restaurant manager, with good pay. Kat didn't correct her. There are lies that exist not because of selfishness, but because if the truth were spoken, the person hearing it would worry so much they wouldn't be able to live. She washed the plastic container, dried her hands, then sat down on the floor beside the bed. Reaching under the bed, she pulled out a small wooden drawer with a combination lock. 4 digits. Her father's birthday. Inside was an old tin box, the kind of cookie tin her mother used to keep on top of the refrigerator when Kat was little. Kat opened the lid. The smell of old paper rose up, the kind of smell that only belongs to things kept too long in the dark. On top, 2 photographs. The first one was of her parents on their wedding day. Frank Moran, 28 years old, with reddish-brown Irish hair, smiling with his head tilted, one arm around the waist of Diana, her mother, who wore a simple white dress and held flowers already half wilted because the pictures had been taken late. The second photograph showed Frank holding Kat when she was 3 years old, perched on his shoulders. She was laughing, he was laughing, and behind them was a stainless steel industrial kitchen that Kat never knew the location of. Beneath the photographs, a stack of newspaper clippings from the Daily News and the Brooklyn Eagle, taped onto cardstock with yellowed tape. Frank Moran, 34, missing since October 2006, last seen in Red Hook, Brooklyn. Police suspect foul play. The next article. Search for missing Brooklyn man called off after 6 months. Wife Diana Moran declined to comment. The last one, 3 small lines in the corner of the page. Case closed. No suspects. Kat had read these articles hundreds of times. Every word had printed itself into her mind more deeply than any lesson she had ever learned in school. At the bottom of the box was a thick black notebook, handwritten, 4 years of notes. On the first page, when she was 17 years old, her handwriting was still round, still young. Found Dad's old police file at the public library. Case number 06-4471. Last witness who saw Dad, the night of October 12th, 2006, near a warehouse in Red Hook. Name mentioned in the file, Salvatore Valenti. That was the first time she saw that name. Valenti. She remembered sitting in the Brooklyn Public Library at 17 years old, reading that name on the microfiche screen, and feeling the world shift beneath her feet. Not because of fear, because finally, after 10 years of not knowing, she had a direction. From there, 10 more years. She studied, she read, she watched. She learned the Valenti family from the outside in, through newspapers, through public records, through tiny items on business pages that no one read. She knew Tavola was the original restaurant, the first restaurant, the place where everything began. And 2 years ago, she applied to work there as a waitress. But before Tavola, before the notebook, before the name Valenti, there had been another night. Kat was 12 years old. Her mother died in their Flatbush apartment at 3 o'clock in the morning. Sitting on the sofa, a cheap bottle of liquor spilled across the floor, the TV still tuned to a news channel no one was watching. Kat found her mother at 6 o'clock in the morning when she got up for school. She stood in the living room doorway and looked at her mother for 30 seconds before calling 911. She didn't cry. Not because she was strong, because she had already cried all her tears for her father, and at 12 years old, she had nothing left to cry with. The social worker arrived at 8 o'clock. A short-haired woman in a gray coat, carrying a file folder, looking at Kat with eyes that were both kind and exhausted, the kind of eyes belonging to someone who had seen too many children standing in doorways, looking at their parents lying still. The first foster home was in East New York, 6 months, too many people in the house, Kat sleeping in the same room with 3 other kids. The second was in Canarsie, 1 year, the foster father was good, but the foster mother drank, a loop Kat recognized before she was even old enough to name it. The third was in Brownsville, 2 years, where she met Jess, the only girl who asked Kat, "Are you okay?" and actually waited for the answer. From then on, Jess was family, not by blood, by choice. Kat set the notebook down, reached into the bottom of the box, and took out a white envelope that had yellowed with age, the letter her mother had written. Diana wrote it 2 weeks before she died, the handwriting slanted, trembling, blurred at the right corner by water, maybe tears, maybe liquor, maybe both. Kat opened the letter. She had read this letter every night for 10 years. Every night after coming home from Tavola, she sat on the floor of this studio, opened the box, read the letter, then put it away again. A ritual, a prayer, a reminder. "Katerina, my daughter, your father wasn't the man they said he was. Your father was loyal. Your father was good. They killed your father because they could, and no one stopped them. Don't forget, don't forgive." Kat read. Every word was as familiar as breathing. But tonight, her hands trembled. Not because of fear, because 3 hours earlier, she had held the hand of a 63-year-old woman inside Tavola, led her to the window table, and that old woman had looked at her in a way no one had looked at her since her mother was still sober. The look of someone who saw her, not the waitress, or the employee, or the poor girl, but her. And that old woman was Margaret Valenti, wife of Salvatore Valenti, the man who had ordered her father killed. Kat looked at the letter, read down to the 3rd line. "They killed your father." The 4th line, "Don't forget." The 5th line, the last line, the 2 words she had read every night for 10 years as if swallowing medicine. "Don't forgive." She folded the letter. Before reaching that line, for the first time in 10 years, she didn't read to the end. She didn't put the letter back into the box. She left it on the table, open, folded in half, the final line face down against the wood. Then she turned off the light and lay down, eyes open in the dark, listening to the subway rumble through the floor, and thinking about the eyes of an old woman in a wool coat whom she was supposed to hate, but couldn't. At 5 o'clock in the morning, at Tavola's back door, The sky had not fully brightened yet, and little Italy was still asleep, with only the smell of bread from the shop next door and the sound of a garbage truck at the end of the block. Grant Valenti stood before the peeling painted iron door in the alley behind the restaurant, wearing an old gray t-shirt, jeans, and work shoes with rubber soles that Fletcher had bought from a thrift store on Atlantic Avenue the previous afternoon. For the first time in 15 years, he wasn't wearing tailored clothes. For the first time in 15 years, he stood before the back door of a building he owned without anyone opening it for him. He opened it himself. Inside, a narrow hallway led into the kitchen, the fluorescent light flickering, the tile floor still wet from the cleaning the night before. Katerina was already there, apron tied, hair pulled back neatly, hands stacking cups onto a shelf. She turned when she heard footsteps, looked at him, and nodded like someone who had already been told a new person was coming. "Jack? Yeah, I'm Kat. You're with me this morning." No handshake, no long greeting. She turned back to work and began training him by doing. Lids are under the second sink, not the first. First sink is chemicals. You mix those up, the whole morning's ruined. She pointed toward the towel rack. Blue rags for tables, red rags for floors. Don't ever let a customer see the mop bucket. If they see it, you've already failed. Grant remembered it, not because he needed to know where the cup lids were, but because of the way she spoke. Fast, precise, without one wasted word. The kind of person who had done this work long enough to turn it into reflex, but still cared enough to teach a newcomer to do it right, instead of just doing it fast. As the hours passed and the restaurant officially opened for the day, the first regular customer walked in. The first customer was an old man, 68 years old, with the straight posture of a military man, an old army jacket on his shoulders, walking in slowly and heading straight to the table by the left window as if his name had been carved into it. Kat didn't need to look. She had already poured water into a glass before he sat down. Rigatoni bolognese, extra parmesan, sparkling water, no ice. Right, Walt? Walt looked up and smiled, the kind of smile belonging to someone used to no one remembering his name, and still surprised every time someone did. 20 years in the Marines, and you're the only person in this city who remembers I hate ice, Kat. That's because the Marines trained you to be tough, Walt. Nobody trained them to listen. Walt laughed again. Grant wiped a table 3 steps away, hearing everything. He watched the way Kat took an order without needing to write it down. The way she remembered names, remembered dishes, remembered even the smallest details. And he thought about the reviews Fletcher had given him yesterday morning, the words hostile and unwelcome. And he realized this restaurant didn't lack people who knew how to serve. It lacked someone willing to protect those people. At 7:30, an old woman named Mrs. Garza came in alone, sat at the corner table, and ordered black coffee and nothing else. Kat brought the coffee out, then went back into the kitchen, and when she returned, she had an extra small plate in her hand. Tiramisu. She set it in front of Mrs. Garza sat down beside her and spoke softly enough for only the two of them to hear. "Mrs. Garza, today's your anniversary. I know you used to come here with Mr. Garza every year. This one's from me." Mrs. Garza looked at the plate of tiramisu. Then she looked at Kat. Her eyes reddened. She didn't say thank you. She simply took Kat's hand and held it tightly for 30 seconds. Kat held hers back. Said nothing more. 30 seconds. Then she stood, walked straight into the kitchen, picked up a tray of dirty plates, and kept working as if what had just happened was nothing worth mentioning. She didn't tell anyone, didn't wait for praise. Grant stood at the bar, holding a cleaning cloth he had forgotten to use, watching her. He had run 40 restaurants, hundreds of employees, and he had never seen anyone treat customers like that, not because of procedure, not because she was afraid of being fired, because she genuinely cared. He asked her during the break between shifts, while she was wiping table 14 for the second time that morning. "You like it here?" Kat stopped. Her hand was still on the tabletop, the cloth still caught beneath her palm. She didn't look at him. She paused for a long time, the kind of pause made by someone weighing the true answer against the safe one. "I like the people who eat here." She didn't say she liked the restaurant. Didn't say she liked the job. Didn't say she hated it. She only said she liked the customers. That answer said more than any complaint could have. At 10 o'clock in the morning, the shift changed. Grant heard Neil hail before he saw him. Cologne, heavy and expensive, the kind of scent that overpowered everything within a 3-meter radius. Then came the sound of leather shoes striking the tile floor, slow and confident, the stride of a man who believed every step he took was a favor to the ground. Neil came in through the front door, not the back door like every other employee. Wesley Briggs followed behind him, his bartender shirt pressed smooth, hair slicked with gel, smiling the way people smile because the boss is smiling, not because anything is funny. The air in the restaurant changed immediately, as if someone had turned a valve. 2 servers in the bar area lowered their voices. A busboy mopping the floor suddenly mopped faster. Kat said nothing, but her shoulders straightened, the kind of straightness that meant someone was preparing to endure, not standing in confidence. Neil looked at Grant. "You're the new kid?" "Yeah, Jack, transferred from Brooklyn." "Stay out of the dining room. Busboys don't talk to customers. You clear plates, you disappear. That's your whole job." Grant nodded. He had heard that voice before, the voice of someone who had been handed a little power and used it like great power. By the time the noon rush hit, Walt was sitting at his usual window table, his glass of water half empty, his plate of rigatoni clean. He was reading the newspaper. Neil walked past, stopped, looked at Walt, then looked at the table. "Sir, that table's reserved for the lunch rush." Walt looked up, looked around the restaurant. 4 tables were empty. "It's half empty, son. Reserved means reserved. There's a counter seat by the kitchen." Walt said nothing more. He folded his newspaper and stood slowly, the way a man stands when he has grown used to being told to move and no longer has the energy to ask why. He sat down on the high stool beside the kitchen, his back curved, his face turned toward the wall. 20 years serving his country, 8 years sitting at the same table every week, and a 26-year-old boy had just chased him out of it because it was reserved. Kat brought a fresh glass of water to the counter, set it in front of Walt, and spoke softly enough for only him to hear. "I'm sorry, Walt. I'm trying." Walt didn't look up. He only patted her hand lightly on the counter, twice, then lifted the glass and drank. No words, none needed. That little pat said it for him. "I know, sweetheart. I know." Grant stood in the kitchen doorway watching. The window table was empty. Walt sat beside the wall. Neil stood at the host stand, smiling at a young couple who had just walked in, his voice sweet. "Hey, welcome to Tavola. Best table in the house for you two. Same restaurant, same hour, 2 ways of treating people." Grant returned to the penthouse at 8 o'clock that night. He didn't shower, didn't change clothes. He sat down in a chair in the dark, opened his phone, opened the Notes app, and typed a single word: rot. On the second day, Grant volunteered to take inventory in the storage room. No one questioned it. The new busboy wanted to prove himself, which was normal. Neil didn't even look at him when Grant carried the delivery boxes into the back, the kind of look reserved for someone he had already filed under, not worth remembering. Good. Grant needed exactly that. The manager's office behind the kitchen was a windowless room, smaller than the bathroom in his penthouse. 1 desk, 1 metal filing cabinet, an old printer covered in dust, and a swivel chair upholstered in cracked fake leather, the smell of cold coffee and old paper. Grant closed the door, sat down, and started with the most obvious thing: the books. On the desk, neatly kept inside a clear plastic folder, was the polished set of books meant to be sent up to Grant. Monthly revenue, steady, rising slightly, every number matching every other number. So perfect it was suspicious. No restaurant on earth has 6 straight months where everything goes up by exactly 3 to 5%. Life isn't that neat. Only fake numbers are that neat. Grant opened the bottom drawer. Locked. He looked at the lock, a cheap one, the kind bought at a hardware store. From his back pocket, he pulled out a straightened paperclip, a skill from when he was 16 years old in Brooklyn, and life hadn't yet given him the right to use anyone's key. 4 seconds, the drawer popped open. Inside was a second set of books. Same months, same periods, completely different. The real revenue was 40% lower than the version sent to Conrad. But what made Grant stop wasn't the gap in the numbers. It was the way the money disappeared. Every month, $30,000 to $50,000 was listed as payment to a special supplier named Meridian Provisions. Grant flipped through 6 months of records. Meridian Provisions appeared every month, different amounts. No attached invoices, no delivery address, no contact name. He took out his phone and searched quickly. Meridian Provisions didn't exist. No website, no business registration in New York, no tax ID. $30,000 to $50,000 each month flowed into a name that wasn't real. 6 months, at least $200,000 gone through a door no one had seen. Grant set the books down and moved to the POS system, the computer in the corner of the desk, its screen smudged with fingerprints. He logged in using the shift manager code he had watched Neil type in yesterday morning. 4 numbers. Neil entering it right in front of everyone because he never imagined a busboy knew how to watch. Tip distribution. 6 months of data. Grant pulled up each week. The pattern appeared immediately, as clear as an ink stain on a white towel. Neil Hale and Wesley Briggs, 75% of the total tips. The remaining 6 employees, including Kat, Petra, and 4 others, splitting 25%. Same hours, same shifts, same restaurant. 75 divided between 2 people. 25 divided among 6. Grant clicked further. Employee schedules. The most recent 6 months. Katerina Moran's name appeared in the same place every week, as if nailed there. 5 o'clock in the morning to 8 o'clock in the morning, or 9 o'clock at night until closing. Dead shifts. Early morning when the restaurant was nearly empty. Late night when only a few lingering customers remained, and tips were close to nothing. Not one peak shift. Not Saturday lunch. Not Friday night. Not the golden hours. 6 straight months. She had been assigned to the stretches of time when the restaurant almost didn't exist. Not bad luck. Not random. This was design. Grant opened the internal complaint file next. A folder on the computer simply named Staff Complaints. Inside were 3 files under the name Katerina Moran. The first complaint, 4 months earlier. Unfair scheduling, requesting rotation into peak shifts like the other employees. Note at the bottom of the page. Reviewed. Current scheduling reflects operational needs. No adjustment required. Signed, Conrad Hale. The second complaint, 3 months earlier. Unequal tip distribution. Requesting a transparent audit. Note, reviewed. Tip policy is at store-level discretion. No action required. Signed, Conrad Hale. The third complaint, 6 weeks earlier. The conduct of the evening shift manager toward older customers, including refusing service and seating regulars at inferior tables without reason. Note, reviewed. Staff conduct within acceptable parameters. No further action. Signed, Conrad Hale. 3 complaints. 3 dismissals. The same signature. The same cold, administrative language. The kind of language designed to look fair while actually being a door slammed in someone's face. Grant looked at Conrad Hale's name, repeated 3 times, and felt something settle into place in his mind. The soft click that comes when the final piece fits into the picture. He opened the personnel file, searched Neil Hale's record, scrolled past hiring date, contract, W-4, salary information, down to the emergency contact section. Emergency contact, Conrad Hale. Relationship, father. Father, Neil was Conrad's son. Conrad was the underboss overseeing Grant's entire legitimate side, including every restaurant. Neil ran the Tavola floor. Staff complained about Neil. The complaints went up to Conrad. And Conrad signed the dismissals. Tips flowed to Neil. The schedule pushed everyone else to the margins, and no one checked because the person doing the checking was the father of the person being checked. A closed circle. Perfect. Protecting itself. Feeding itself. Shielding itself. Grant photographed every page. The books, the tips, the schedules, the complaints, the personnel file. One picture after another. Slow, clear, unhurried. His hand was steady. His jaw was hard. He put everything back exactly where it had been, in the exact position, at the exact angle, closed the drawer, locked it again, stood, pushed the chair in, looked at the room one last time. A machine built to protect itself, and he had built the house for that machine to run inside. On the second night, at 9:30, the evening shift was over. The restaurant was closed to customers, but the staff still had another 45 minutes of cleaning to do. Neil and Wesley left at exactly 9:15. As always, right when the dirty work began. Kat stayed behind to mop the floor, stack the chairs, and count the glasses. Grant stayed because Jack had been assigned to closing. When everything was finished, Kat carried a brown paper bag out into the back alley, sat down on the concrete step beside the trash bins, opened the bag, and took out half a sandwich wrapped in foil. The alley behind Tavola was narrow, dark, thick with the mixed smell of garbage and dishwater. The kind of smell you could only tolerate if you were used to it, or if you had nowhere else to sit. Kat was used to it. Grant stepped outside, looked around, and saw her sitting there. He didn't ask if he could sit beside her. He simply turned over an old plastic crate, set it down, and sat. Silence. The kind of silence between two people who were both tired after a long shift and didn't need to fill the air with words. Kat took a bite of the sandwich. Grant looked at the brick wall across from them, at an old graffiti piece half painted over, the new layer of paint not quite thick enough to hide what had been there before. Kat spoke first. "You're not from Brooklyn, are you?" Grant looked at her. "What makes you say that? Brooklyn busboys don't volunteer for inventory. They hide from it." It was almost a smile. Not quite. Just the corner of her mouth lifting 1 millimeter, then returning to where it had been. Grant didn't answer that. Instead, he asked, "Where'd you grow up?" Kat chewed slowly, swallowed, and stared straight at the graffiti wall, as if the answer were somewhere inside the peeling paint. "Foster care. A few places in Brooklyn. East New York, Canarsie, Brownsville." She said it in a flat voice, not sad, not self-pitying, the voice of someone who had told this story enough times that all its sharp edges had worn away, or the voice of someone hurt so deeply that showing it would be pointless, because showing it wouldn't change anything. "Parents. Mom died when I was 12, Dad before that. I was 7. She said, "I was 7, the way someone would say I was late for the bus." A fact, not a cry for help. Grant was silent. Then, because she had given him a piece of herself, he gave one back. "I lost my dad too. I was forced to step up and take over before I was truly ready." Kat looked at him for the first time since they had sat down. Really looked, not glanced. The kind of look from someone measuring whether that sentence carried real weight or was only a polite reply. "What'd your dad do?" Grant stopped. 1 beat. 2 beats. He heard water dripping from the drainpipe on the wall, heard the garbage truck at the mouth of the alley, heard himself weighing the truth against the safer version of the truth. He ran a small business, Italian food. Not a lie, not the truth, just cut down to fit the frame. Kat nodded, slowly, the kind of nod from someone who understood that small business could mean a lot of things, and didn't ask more because she had things she didn't fully tell either. "Mine too, in a way." She looked back at the wall. "He worked for a family business. Italian, actually." A pause. "They killed him for it." The sentence didn't fall. It hung there, between the two of them, between the smell of garbage and dishwater, between the dark alley behind a restaurant that one of them owned and the other wanted to destroy. That sentence hung in the air like cigarette smoke. Kat didn't explain. Didn't say who killed him. Didn't say why. She said it the way someone might state the weather. Flat, finished, then moved on. She folded the foil, tucked it into the paper bag, stood, and brushed off her pants. "See you tomorrow, Jack." She stepped through the back door, didn't turn around, didn't wait for his reaction, didn't need him to say "I'm sorry" or "That's terrible." She had lived 20 years without needing anyone to say those things. One more time without them wouldn't make any difference. Grant sat alone on the overturned plastic crate in the dark alley. They killed him for it. 4 words. He heard them over and over in his head. A 27-year-old girl, orphaned, raised in foster care, working as a waitress in his restaurant, had just told him that her father had been killed for working for a family in the Italian food business. He stood, walked to the mouth of the alley, and caught a taxi back to Tribeca. In the taxi, he called Fletcher, Katerina Moran. "I need everything. Parents, background, anything connected to us. Everything." Silence on the other end of the line. Not the kind of silence that meant Fletcher was searching for information. The kind that meant Fletcher was weighing how to say it. 10 seconds. Frank Moran. Fletcher spoke slowly, clearly, each word deliberate. "Worked for your father from 98 to 06. Mostly kitchen operations at Tavola. Legit side, but he had access to the books, the schedules, the delivery routes. Your father trusted him." A pause. "In 06, someone leaked shipping routes to the feds. 2 containers got seized at the Brooklyn port. Your father suspected Frank. Conrad Hale confirmed the suspicion." A longer pause. "Your father gave the order. Frank disappeared October 12th, 2006. Body never found. Case closed after 6 months." Grant looked through the taxi window. Streetlights ran backward in yellow streaks. Was he guilty? Never confirmed. The leak stopped after Frank disappeared, but that could mean anything. Could mean Frank was the source. Could mean the real source got scared and stopped. Could mean Conrad handled it either way. Conrad. Conrad was the one who brought the suspicion to your father. He was the one who confirmed it. Your father trusted his word. The taxi stopped in front of the Tribeca building. Grant didn't get out right away. He sat in the back seat, phone pressed to his ear, looking through the glass at the brightly lit lobby. Fletcher. She's been working in my restaurant for 2 years. I know. She's had access to the books, the schedule, the names, same access her father had. I know. 700 days. She's had 700 days to burn me down. She hasn't lit a single match. Silence. Why? Fletcher didn't answer. Grant didn't have an answer either. He paid the taxi fare, walked into the lobby, took the elevator up, and entered the penthouse. He didn't turn on the lights. He sat in the dark, looking at Manhattan blazing beyond the glass, and thought about a girl eating a sandwich in a dark alley, telling him about her father in a voice that had no tears left, then standing up and walking back inside as if everything were normal. 700 days. And she hadn't struck a single match. On the third morning, Grant was assigned to the kitchen to assist Benny Ferraro. Neil made that decision without thinking. He needed a busboy on the floor less because today was Tuesday, the slowest day of the week, and pushing Jack into the kitchen to wash vegetables with the old man was the way he arranged things. People he didn't care about went where he didn't have to see them. Grant didn't object. Tavola's kitchen at 4:45 in the morning was quiet in the way a church is quiet before Mass. Yellow lights, stainless steel gleaming under the dim glow, the smell of garlic from the night before still clinging to the stovetops. Benny Ferraro was already there, 74 years old, white apron tied tight, old chef's hat softened like a rag from being washed too many times. He stood in front of the wooden cutting board, his left hand holding an onion, his right hand holding a knife. His hand trembled. Lightly, steadily, the kind of tremor that came from age, not fear. But when the blade touched the onion, his hand stopped trembling. 40 years of cutting vegetables every morning had carved into his muscles, something his mind no longer needed to command. Each slice was thin, even, precise, almost meaninglessly beautiful in a restaurant where the manager wanted to replace fresh sauce with canned sauce. "You're the new kid," Benny said without looking up. "Jack, grab an apron. Cutting boards on the left. Don't touch the knives on the right wall. Those are mine." Grant put on an apron and took his place beside Benny. Benny pointed at the basket of tomatoes. "Quarter them. Don't crush. If you crush a tomato in my kitchen, you're mopping the walk-in." Grant cut. Benny watched, then gave a slight nod. The kind of nod from a man who wasn't easy to satisfy but accepted that the new kid at least knew how to hold a knife properly. They worked in silence for 15 minutes. Then Benny began to talk, not because he wanted conversation, because he was old, because he was alone in the kitchen every morning from 4:30, and when someone stood beside him, 40 years of memory started running out on their own, like water from a faucet that had not been closed all the way. "You're standing where he used to stand." Grant looked up. "Who?" "Sal, the owner. Original owner." Benny set the knife down and wiped his hands on his apron. 4 o'clock in the morning. Every morning. Right where you are. Kneading dough. Singing opera. Terrible voice. Couldn't hit a note if his life depended on it. Benny almost laughed. Almost. But his bolognese. Perfect. Every single time. He said the secret was patience. Let it simmer. Don't rush. Don't shortcut. He said a sauce that's been rushed tastes like a lie. Benny opened the large refrigerator. Inside, on the third shelf, between plastic containers of ingredients and bags of greens, sat a large glass jar. A label written by hand in black marker, all capital letters, Sal's Sunday Sauce. Don't touch. Benny looked at the jar of sauce as if he were looking at a relic. "I make this every Sunday. Same recipe. 40 years. Same tomatoes, same basil, same 4 hours on low heat." He closed the refrigerator. His voice changed. No longer soft, now edged. "That kid out there, Neil, told me last month to switch to canned sauce. Pre-made, cheaper. Said we could save $700 a month on ingredients." Benny turned back to the cutting board. "I told him if Sal were alive, he'd burn this restaurant to the ground before he'd let canned sauce touch his kitchen." Grant kept cutting tomatoes. He didn't speak. He listened. Benny went on. and every sentence was like another layer of earth being dug away, something long buried underneath beginning to show. 8 months ago, Neil told me I couldn't go out front anymore, said I was too old, said customers in a fine dining restaurant don't want to see a 74-year-old man in a stained apron. Bad for the brand. Benny stopped cutting, looked down at his hands covered in tiny scars from 40 years of knives and fire. I cooked the first meal served in this restaurant. 40 years ago, the night Sal opened, I made rigatoni for 22 people. Sal stood at the door, shaking every hand. I stood in the kitchen. That was the deal. He was the face. I was the hands. He looked toward the kitchen door that led out to the dining area, the door he was no longer allowed to step through. Now I'm not allowed out of my own kitchen. Grant didn't answer. He didn't trust himself to answer without revealing what was boiling in his chest. He turned toward the shelf behind the stove, looking for another basket of tomatoes, and that was when he saw it. A small framed photograph, set on the shelf between the salt jar and a roll of foil. A cheap wooden frame, the glass slightly cloudy from 40 years of steam and grease in the kitchen. In the photograph, 2 men. The man on the left, Grant recognized immediately. His father, Big Sal, young, maybe in his early 30s, white apron, flour on his arms, on his cheek, on his forehead, smiling wide, the smile Grant remembered from when he was so small he had to climb onto a chair just to see over the kitchen table. The man on the right, another man, about the same age, reddish-brown hair, not Italian, also dusted with flour, also smiling, shoulder to shoulder with Sal, in this very kitchen, in front of the very stainless steel stove Grant was standing beside. Grant recognized that face, not because he had ever met him, because he had seen it 12 hours earlier, in the file Fletcher sent to his phone at midnight. Frank Morin, Katerina's father, in his father's kitchen, smiling beside him. Grant looked at the photograph long enough for Benny to notice. You're looking at the photo. Who's that with Sal? Benny stopped everything. Set the knife down, wiped his hands, looked at the photograph with eyes that softened, the eyes of an old man looking at the dead whom he still had not stopped missing. Frank Moran. A pause. Best pair of hands I ever saw in a kitchen. Better than mine. Better than Sal's, if I'm honest. He could make pasta from nothing. Flour, eggs, water, and something in his wrists that turned it into magic. Benny looked back at the cutting board, as if the photograph had taken too much from him. Sal loved him like a brother. They built this kitchen together. Frank wasn't Italian. Irish kid from Flatbush. Didn't matter. Sal said family isn't blood. Family is who shows up at 4 o'clock in the morning. What happened to him? Disappeared. 2006. One day he was here, next day he wasn't. Nobody talked about it. In this business, you learn not to ask about the people who stop showing up. Grant picked up the photograph, gently, with both hands, as if holding something fragile. His hands trembled. For the first time in 15 years. Not from fear, not from anger, because he was looking at his father with an arm around the shoulders of a man his father had killed. Sal had loved Frank like a brother. Then Sal had killed Frank, and Frank's daughter was standing 10 steps away. Beyond the kitchen door Benny wasn't allowed to walk through, washing coffee cups for the customers Neil allowed her to serve. Noon on the 3rd day. Grant was in the kitchen, stacking clean plates onto the shelf, his hands still working, but his mind still fixed on the photograph on the shelf. 2 men covered in flour, smiling, before one of them killed the other. Then he heard the bell at the front door, and everything changed. Margaret Valenti stepped into Tavola for the 2nd time. The same wool coat, the same small frame but straight back, the kind of straight back belonging to a woman who had lived beside Salvatore Valenti for 40 years and had never bowed her head to anyone. She didn't make a reservation, didn't call ahead. She came because she needed to know. The night before, maybe it had been bad luck. Maybe it had been one rude boy on the wrong shift. But Margaret Valenti wasn't the kind of woman who reached a conclusion after one time. She needed a 2nd time. If the 2nd time looked like the first, then it wasn't bad luck anymore. It was a system. Neil stood at the host stand, phone in hand, new leather shoes polished bright. He looked up when Margaret approached, and there was something in his eyes worse than the first time. Recognition. He remembered her, and he wasn't happy that she had come back. "Ma'am." He didn't smile, didn't pretend to be polite. The last time he had wrapped his contempt in the paper of fully booked. This time, He rapped nothing at all. I told you last time. You don't fit the room. I'm not gonna ask again. 6 words. You don't fit the room, said to the woman whose name was on the lease, set in front of the host's stand, inside the restaurant her husband had built with his own hands, where she had once fed pasta to her son when he was 3 years old. Neil said those 6 words, and believed he had the right. Kat heard it. She was carrying a plate of pasta to table 4, 5 meters from the host stand. Don't fit the room reached her ears between the clink of forks and the soft background music. She stopped mid-step, looked toward the stand, saw Margaret, the same wool coat, the same straight back, the same proud eyes that now, for the second time, had to hear a boy half her age tell her she didn't belong in this place. Kat set the plate of pasta down on the nearest counter, gently, not slammed, but firmly, the way someone sets something down after making a decision and having no intention of changing it. She walked straight to the host stand. Mrs. Margaret, follow me. Your table's ready. Neil turned to her. His jaw tightened. His eyes narrowed. I didn't seat her. I know. I run this floor, Katerina. You don't seat anyone I don't approve. He put out his arm to block her, not touching her, but blocking her, the way a man marks territory. Kat didn't step back. For the first time in 2 years at Tavola, she didn't lower her eyes, didn't move aside, didn't say sorry and turn away. She looked straight into Neil's eyes. Her eyes weren't angry, weren't challenging. They were flat, the flatness of a lake before something breaks the surface. Then fire me, right here, in front of every customer in this room, but she's sitting down. Silence. The kind of silence the whole restaurant could feel, even though no one knew exactly what was happening. 6 occupied tables, 12 pairs of eyes watching, an older woman standing at the host's stand, a young waitress standing across from the manager, and the manager weighing his ego against the cost of making a scene in front of customers paying $200 for lunch. Neil lowered his arm. Not because he respected Kat, not because he realized he was wrong, because 12 people were watching. And Neil Hale, rude as he was, protected as he was by his father, it was still smart enough to know that firing a waitress in front of customers during the lunch rush would create the kind of problem even Conrad couldn't clean up. He stepped back. 1 step. Enough for Kat to lead Margaret through. Kat placed a light hand beneath Margaret's elbow and guided her to the window table. The best table in the restaurant, the same table she had sat at last time. Pulled out the chair, set down the napkin, poured water. Margaret sat, looked at Kat, and took her hand, held it for 3 seconds. You did that for me twice now. Kat looked at her. The eyes of that 63-year-old woman looked at her with something Kat had lost a long time ago. The gaze of an older woman looking at her daughter. Not pity, not empty thanks, but seeing, I'd do it a 3rd time, Mrs. Margaret. Margaret almost smiled. Not quite. The corner of her mouth lifted and stopped. The smile of someone both touched and sad because she had to be protected by a young girl inside her own family's restaurant. Grant saw all of it from the kitchen doorway. He stood in the narrow gap, holding a tray of clean plates he had forgotten to put away 3 minutes earlier. He saw his mother, Margaret Valenti, the woman who had sat beside Salvatore Valenti at every family dinner for 30 years, the woman who had stared unblinking at his father when the FBI knocked on the door in '98. The woman no underboss in the organization would have dared look at without respect, being told by a 26-year-old boy that she didn't deserve to sit inside the restaurant her husband had built. And the only person in the entire restaurant who stood up to protect her wasn't security, wasn't an underboss, wasn't anyone in the Valenti family. It was Katerina Moran, Frank Moran's daughter, the daughter of the man in the flower-covered photograph Grant had held in trembling hands that very morning. The girl who had come to destroy his family had just saved his mother. For the 2nd time, inside Grant's chest, 2 things moved at once. Icy rage toward Neil, the kind of rage that didn't need heat because it worked better cold. And something else, warmer, deeper, turned toward Kat. Something he didn't dare name because naming it would mean admitting she had touched some part of him that 15 years of power had built walls around. Grant set the tray of plates down, took out his phone, texted Fletcher. 1 more day. Then I want everyone in 1 room. Fletcher answered within 30 seconds. What are you going to do? Grant looked through the narrow gap in the kitchen doorway. His mother was reading the menu. Kat was pouring water for her, hands steady, back straight, as if what she had just done was nothing remarkable. My job. At 4:30 in the morning, on the fourth day, Tavola had not opened yet. Little Italy was still asleep, with only the sound of stray cats and the dull yellow streetlights shining down on the dew-damp sidewalk. Grant came in through the back door, used the employee code to unlock the electronic lock, stepped into the dark hallway, and didn't turn on the lights. He didn't go up to the kitchen. He turned left at the end of the hallway, toward the iron door that most employees didn't know existed, or knew about but never opened because they had no reason to. Tavola's basement. Grant pushed the door open and walked down 17 narrow concrete steps, the smell of damp mold and old dust so thick he could almost taste it on his tongue. Below was the storage room, about 40 square meters, low ceiling, one flickering fluorescent bulb overhead. Metal filing cabinets lined both walls, some from Big Sal's time, their handwritten labels faded, some newer, with printed labels. In the right corner, there was a small desk, and on it sat an old computer, the kind of desktop no one should be using in 2026, but it still ran because no one had bothered to replace it. Grant turned it on. The fan buzzed like a hornet. The screen slowly brightened, green and sluggish. He didn't look for files on the desktop. He opened the browser, went into the history, and scrolled back. The browsing history of a computer that was supposed to be used only to store old records and print labels for frozen food, but someone had used it for something else. An email account, not a company email, not Gmail or Yahoo. An encrypted email service, the kind ordinary people didn't know about and didn't need to know. Grant opened it. Using a decryption drive Fletcher had configured to bypass the terminal's history, Grant forced the encrypted portal open within seconds. Sent mailbox. 43 emails over 8 months. Grant opened the first one. Read it. Open the second. Read it. The third. His hand slowed, not because he read slowly, but because every email was a knife cut, and he needed time to feel each one. Shipping routes, dates, times, ports, container numbers, ship names, every shipment passing through Brooklyn over the past 8 months, recorded in such detail that if someone had this list, they could stop every shipment, take every man, collapse every link. VIP client list, not restaurant customers. The Valenti family's VIPs, protected people, underground partners, officials who took envelopes, names, addresses, habits, schedules, security schedules, who stood where, at what hour, when shifts changed, where the weaknesses were, a complete map for destroying the Valenti empire from the inside out. And every email had been sent to the same address. Grant didn't recognize the recipient's name, but he recognized the pattern, the writing style, the way names were coded, the way substitute words were used. He had seen this kind of language before, in negotiations. Fletcher translated for him when the Petrov family sent an offer of cooperation 2 years earlier. Petrov. Conrad Hale was selling information to the Petrov family. Tavola wasn't just a restaurant, not just a money laundering front. It was a transfer station. Conrad had turned Grant's father's first restaurant, the place where Big Sal kneaded dough at 4 o'clock in the morning, the place where Benny had cooked the first meal 40 years ago, the place where Frank Moran and Sal smiled covered in flour in the photograph on the kitchen shelf, into a secret pipeline leading the Valenti family straight into the hands of their enemies. Grant sat back in the chair. The computer was still glowing. 43 emails, 8 months, enough to bring everything down. If Petrov had everything in these emails, the Valenti family wouldn't collapse because it had been attacked from the outside. It would collapse because it had been hollowed from within, and when it fell, no one would be able to catch it. Grant photographed every email, each one, each page. Then he closed the browser, turned off the screen, and stood. He didn't go upstairs right away. He walked to the end of the basement corridor, where the employee lockers stood in a row. 14 small lockers, cheap combination locks, name labels written in marker on tape. He checked each locker. Not just cats. All of them. Most were empty or held ordinary things. Coats, spare shoes, sunscreen, headphones. Neil's locker, an extra bottle of cologne, a pack of cigarettes, and an unmarked envelope of cash. Thick, a few $100s. Grant photographed it and put it back. Wesley's locker. Empty except for a handkerchief and a jar of hair gel. Katerina Moran's locker. Combination lock. Grant tried 4 digits. Not her birthday, which he already knew from Fletcher's file. He tried the date. Frank Moran disappeared. 12:10. The lock opened. Inside, an old denim jacket, a spare pair of sneakers, and at the bottom, beneath the neatly folded jacket, a small notebook, black cover, palm-sized, the kind sold at a $1 stationery store. Grant opened it, Kat's handwriting. Small, neat, each page marked by a date. Not a diary. This was a tracking log. The date and time Conrad came to Tavola. The date and time Conrad left. How long Conrad stayed in the basement each time he went down. The names of suppliers, who came for after-hours deliveries. Names Kat had underlined because they didn't match the official supplier list hanging in the kitchen. Unusual delivery times. 2 o'clock in the morning. 3 o'clock in the morning. Hours when no one delivered food but trucks parked in the back alley. License plate numbers. Grant turned page after page. 2 years of notes. Careful, patient, detailed. And not one line about Grant Valenti. Not one line about the Valenti family. No names, no schedules, no operations. Only Conrad. Only the restaurant. Only the strange things Kat had seen from the position of a dead shift waitress. The only person here at 2 o'clock in the morning when strange trucks parked in the back alley. The only person who saw Conrad go down to the basement when no one was watching. Grant closed the notebook. Put it back beneath the jacket. Closed the locker. Turned the lock. He stood alone in the basement corridor, the fluorescent light flickering above his head. 2 years. She had been here for 2 years. Writing everything down. Not to destroy him. Not to take revenge on the Valenti family. But to find the thing rotting inside. The same thing he was looking for. And she had found it before he did. On the 4th night, at 10:15, Tavola had been closed to customers for 30 minutes. Neil and Wesley had left at 9:45. Right on schedule. Right on habit. Exactly the way people who never cleaned left before the cleaning began. Petra left at 10 o'clock. Benny had gone home at 8. His kitchen shift ending early because Neil had cut another hour from him that week. No reason, no explanation, no need. Only Kat remained. The night shift, like every night, like the past 6 months. She wiped the tables, stacked chairs upside down on tabletops, chair legs pointed toward the ceiling, mopped the floor, checked the windows, and took out the trash. Alone in the dark restaurant, with only the kitchen light spilling through the half-open door and the dishwasher running its final load. Kat was wiping the table by the window, the table where Margaret had sat that afternoon, when she heard footsteps from the kitchen. Not hurried footsteps. Slow, even, deliberate. She turned around. Grant stood at the line between the kitchen and the dining room. Right in the doorway Benny wasn't allowed to step through. But he didn't look like Jack anymore. Not because he had changed clothes. He was still wearing the old gray t-shirt, still in jeans, still in rubber-soled shoes. But something had changed. The way he stood. The different straightness of his back. The different width of his shoulders. The different way his eyes looked. For the past 4 days, Jack had lowered his head, avoided eyes, moved like a man trying to make himself smaller. The man standing in front of Kat now didn't make himself small. He filled the room. He stepped forward and placed something on the table Kat had just wiped clean. The black notebook. Her notebook. Kat looked at the notebook, looked at him. Her hand was still holding the cleaning cloth. She didn't drop the cloth, didn't step back, didn't run. She stood still, the stillness of an animal that knows the trap has snapped shut and every movement is useless. Grant removed the baseball cap he had worn for 4 days, set it beside the notebook. He looked at her. His voice was low, not dramatic, not frightening, only the truth spoken in the voice of a man tired of pretending. My name is Grant Valenti. I own this restaurant. I own 12 restaurants. I own the building you're standing in. 3 seconds. Kat froze for 3 seconds. Not from fear. She had lived 20 years with the possibility that this moment would come. She just hadn't thought it would come like this, in an empty restaurant after closing, from a man she had taught 4 days earlier how to tell the blue cleaning cloths from the red ones. Then she straightened, dropped the cloth onto the table. Her back was as straight as Margaret's had been when she stood at the host stand that afternoon. Your father killed my father. Her voice didn't tremble, didn't rise. It was flat, like ice water. Frank Moran, 20 years ago. He worked in this kitchen. He was loyal. He was innocent. And your father had him killed because someone told him Frank was a rat. She stopped, looked straight into Grant's eyes. He wasn't. I came here to find proof. I came here to destroy everything you built. Everything your father built. Everything that carries the Valenti name. Grant didn't deny it. Didn't say, you're wrong. Didn't say, I can explain. Didn't say, my father had his reasons. He stood there and took it. The posture of a man who knew that arguing now wouldn't be courage. It would be cowardice. Kat continued, I've been here 2 years. I've seen the books Conrad keeps in the back office. I've seen the emails on the basement computer. I know he's selling your shipping routes, your client list, your security schedules to the Petrovs. I know Tavola is the leak. I have dates, names, amounts. She stopped. I could have taken everything to the FBI. Your whole family. Done. Or I could have taken it to the Petrovs directly, let them use it against you, and watched the Valenti empire eat itself alive. Silence. The dishwasher stopped running. The restaurant went completely still. I could have burned you to the ground, Grant. For the first time, she called him by his name. Not Jack, his real name. And the way she said it, not angry, not hateful, almost tired, made Grant understand that she had thought about destroying him for a very long time, long enough for destruction to lose its sweetness and leave only the taste of ash. Why didn't you? A long silence. Kat looked at the window table. The table where Margaret had sat. The table where she had pulled out the chair for her twice. Because your mother sat at that table and told me I remind her of someone she used to be. A pause. Because Walt comes here every Sunday, and the only person in this building who remembers he hates ice is me. A pause. Because Benny stands in that kitchen at 4 o'clock in the morning making your father's bread recipe and cries when he thinks nobody's watching. But I'm always here at 4 o'clock in the morning. I always see it. She looked back at Grant. I came here to hate everything in this building. But the people who eat here, the people who work here, the ones your system forgot, they're not your empire. They're just people, and I couldn't burn them to get to you. Grant was silent. Then he spoke. Slowly, one word at a time. Not in the voice of a boss, not in the voice of a CEO, but in the voice of the 17-year-old son who had inherited an empire before he fully understood the cost. Your father, Frank Moran. I was 17 when it happened. I didn't give the order. I didn't know about it until years later. A pause. But I inherited the man who did. I inherited his empire, his name, his decisions, including that one. He pulled out a chair, a customer's chair. For the first time in 15 years, Grant Valenti sat on this side of the table. The side where he never sat because he was always on the owning side, the controlling side, the standing side. He sat down like a customer. Like an ordinary man. I'll find out the truth about your father. Whatever it is. Even if it proves my father was wrong. Even if it proves Conrad lied. Even if it destroys everything I believe about the man who raised me. Kat looked at him. She didn't believe him. Not yet. But she also didn't not believe him. She was weighing him, measuring him, trying to see whether that sentence carried real weight or was only pretty words from a powerful man she had spent 20 years learning not to trust. Why would you do that? Grant looked at the photograph of his father on the wall at the far end of the restaurant. Big Sal, white apron, smiling. Then he looked back at Kat. Because my father said we eat at the same table, or we don't eat at all. A pause. If I can't sit at this table with you, with the daughter of a man my father killed, and look you in the eye, and tell you the truth, then the table means nothing, the restaurant means nothing, the name means nothing. The next day, at 10 o'clock in the morning, Conrad Hale sat in his office on the 12th floor of the Valenti Group building in Tribeca. Black coffee sat on the desk, untouched, his laptop screen open. Conrad wasn't the kind of man who drank morning coffee to stay awake. He was awake 24 hours a day, with the kind of alertness belonging to a man who always knew he was walking on a wire, and that wire could snap at any moment. This morning, the wire trembled. The security system Conrad had installed on the basement computer at Tavola, a small program hidden deep inside the operating system, recording every time the machine was turned on, every time the browser was opened, every time someone accessed it, had sent an alert. Someone had turned the computer on at 4:37 in the morning. Someone had opened the browser. Someone had accessed the encrypted email account Conrad had never logged out of, because he didn't think anyone knew that computer existed, much less that someone would go down to the basement at 4:30 in the morning. Conrad looked at the log. Access time, 23 minutes. Long enough to read everything. Long enough to photograph everything. He opened Tavala's security camera files. The back door opened at 4:29 with an employee code. Alley camera. Blind spot. No face visible. Kitchen camera. No one passed through. Which meant whoever it was had turned left in the hallway, gone down to the basement, known the way. Conrad leaned back in his chair, thinking. Who had an employee code? 14 people. Who stayed after closing? He pulled up the evening shift schedule on the system. Night shift. 10 o'clock to close. For the past 6 months, the same name. Katerina Moran. The waitress. The girl pushed onto the dead shifts, whose schedule he signed off on every week. The girl who had submitted 3 complaints, all 3 of which he had rejected. The only girl inside Tavola at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, often enough to see things no one else saw. Conrad picked up the phone, called Neil. The waitress, Katerina. What about her? She's been going through files. The basement. Handle it. Quietly. Neil was silent for 2 seconds. How quiet? Quiet enough that she understands. Loud enough that she stops. Neil didn't ask anything else. He was Conrad's son. He didn't need the details explained. He understood the word handle, the way children raised in this world understood it. Not writing a warning email, not calling someone into a meeting. That night, at 9:45, Kat stepped out through Tavola's back door into the alley after finishing her night shift. The alley was dark, the streetlight at the mouth of it casting in just enough glow to see the path, but not enough to clearly see a person's face. Kat wore her denim jacket, her bag on her shoulder, walking quickly toward the end of the alley to reach the main street and catch the train. Neil stood leaning against the wall, 5 meters from the back door, not smoking, not looking at his phone, just standing there, waiting. Katerina. Kat stopped, turned back. Neil stepped out of the dark. No smile, no performance. His face was completely different from the one he wore at the host stand. No fake smile for the customers who fit the brand. No sweet voice for the young, good-looking couple. This was the real face, cold, his head tilted slightly, the kind of tilt belonging to someone weighing a warning against something heavier than a warning. I know you've been looking at things that aren't yours. Kat didn't step back. She stood still, one hand gripping the strap of the bag on her shoulder, eyes straight ahead. But inside, she heard her heart beating faster, the kind of beating that 2 years at Tavola had never triggered, because for 2 years Neil had only been a rude manager. But tonight, Neil was the son of Conrad Hale, and Conrad Hale was an underboss in the Valenti family, and a warning from an underboss's son in a dark alley was not the warning of a restaurant manager. People who go through things that aren't theirs in this business. Neil took another step. They don't come back to work. A pause. They don't come back at all. Nothing more. No need. He turned away, walked toward the opposite end of the alley, and vanished into the dark. Kat stood there for another 5 seconds. Then she went. Fast. Not running, but fast. The kind of fast belonging to someone trying to keep her steps normal while every nerve in her body was screaming at her to run. On the train back to Bushwick, she sat in the last seat of the car, her back against the wall, eyes on the door. Her hand clenched the steel pole, her palm cold, even though the train car was hot. She counted the stations. Franklin Avenue, Nostrand, Halsey. Each station was a breath. When she got back to the studio, she locked the door, checked the window, and pulled the curtains shut. She sat down on the floor beside the bed, opened the drawer, opened the tin box, looked at her father's photograph, Frank Moran smiling with his 3-year-old daughter on his shoulders. In the stainless steel kitchen Kat now knew was Tavola's kitchen. The same kitchen where the photograph of Frank and Sal standing side by side, covered in flour, had been taken. She looked at the photograph, and for the first time in 2 years, she thought about running, disappearing, changing her name, changing cities. She had spent the first 12 years of her life losing everything. She knew how to start again from nothing. She could do it again. But then she looked at her father's photograph, and beyond that photograph, another image rose in her mind. Margaret's hand holding hers at the window table yesterday afternoon. You did that for me twice now. And the eyes of that 63-year-old woman looking at her not like a waitress, but like a daughter. Kat closed the box, pushed it back under the bed. She didn't run. She stayed. At the same time, in the Tribeca penthouse, Fletcher called Grant. We've got a problem. Conrad ran a security check on the basement system today. He found the access log from this morning. He doesn't know it was you. He thinks it was a staff member. Who does he think? The waitress, Katerina. She's the only one consistently in the building after hours. He told Neil to handle it. Grant rose from his chair. Handle it how? I don't know yet. But Conrad's exact words to Neil were, handle it quietly. In Conrad's vocabulary, that's not a write-up. Grant was silent for 3 seconds. 3 seconds Fletcher counted in his head. Because when Grant Valenti went silent for 3 seconds, whatever he said next would change everything. Move the dinner to tomorrow night. Everything we planned for Sunday, it happens tomorrow. That's less than 24 hours, Grant. I need time to. Tomorrow. A pause. And Fletcher. Put someone outside Katerina's building tonight. Someone good. Someone quiet. You want surveillance or protection? Protection. Silence. Nothing happens to her. Nothing. The following evening, Tavola had been closed to customers since 6 o'clock. A private event sign hung on the glass door. Inside, the small tables had been pushed to both sides, replaced by one long table set in the center of the restaurant, in the exact spot where, 40 years earlier, Big Sal had placed a table once a month for family dinner. Candles. White tablecloth. Red wine. 14 place settings. The family dinner tradition, created by Big Sal the year the restaurant first opened, had one simple rule. Everyone sat at the same table, ate the same food, and either told the truth or said nothing at all. Grant hadn't held one of these dinners in 3 years. Tonight, he brought it back. Conrad Hale arrived first. Exactly at 7 o'clock. Gray suit, cologne so heavy Petra could smell it from the far end of the table. He sat on the right side of the table, the seat he always took, the underboss's seat, close to the head of the table, but not at the head. Confident, wide smile. The kind of confidence belonging to a man who believed he had handled every problem the night before, when he sent Neil to handle the waitress in the dark alley. Neil sat beside his father, leaning back in his chair, one leg crossed over the other, phone on the table. Wesley sat one chair behind Neil, saying nothing, needing to say nothing, because a shadow never needed a reason to be there. Kat sat in the middle of the table, across from Conrad. She didn't know why Grant had asked her to be there. He had only said, "Be there at 7. Sit wherever you want." She chose a seat where she could look Conrad straight in the eye. Benny Ferraro stepped out of the kitchen for the first time in 8 months. He wore a clean apron, a new chef's hat, his hands trembling lightly. But he walked through the door Neil had forbidden him to cross, and he sat down. Petra sat beside Kat. Fletcher sat at the end of the table, a black leather briefcase placed beneath his chair, and at the head of the table opposite Grant sat Margaret Valenti. Her wool coat was draped over the back of her chair. She sat straight, looked at everyone, said nothing. At 7:15, Grant stood, black shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows, no suit jacket, no watch, nothing but him in the room. He didn't make an opening speech. He tapped the table lightly twice, and the kitchen staff brought out the first dish, bruschetta, placed in the center of the table. The smell of roasted garlic and fresh tomatoes spread through the room. Grant looked at Neil. This bruschetta, Benny Ferraro made it. He's made it every day for 40 years. Same recipe, same hands. A pause. 8 months ago, someone told him he couldn't leave the kitchen anymore. Too old. Bad for the brand. Grant looked at Neil. You banned the man who cooked the first meal in this restaurant from his own dining room. Neil didn't look up. For the first time in the 4 days Grant had known him, Neil didn't have an answer ready. The second dish. Rigatoni bolognese. This is Walt's dish. He's eaten it here every Sunday for 8 years. 3 weeks ago, someone told him his table was reserved. Grant let the silence hold for 3 seconds. The table was empty. Walt sat by the kitchen wall. He's a veteran. 20 years in the Marines, and he was told he didn't deserve a window seat in a restaurant his loyalty helped keep alive. The third dish. Tiramisu. One person in this room gave this free to a widow on her wedding anniversary, sat with her, held her hand, 30 seconds, then went back to work. Grant looked at Kat. She didn't look back. Her eyes stayed on the plate of tiramisu. That person has been on dead shifts for 6 months. 5 o'clock openings, 9 o'clock closings, no peak hours, no tips worth counting. She filed 3 complaints. A pause. All 3 were reviewed. All 3 were dismissed. All 3 were signed by the same name. Grant didn't look at Conrad. He didn't need to. Everyone in the room already had. Conrad tilted his head slightly, the kind of tilt belonging to a man beginning to understand that this dinner wasn't a dinner. Grant nodded to Fletcher. Fletcher opened the leather briefcase. took out a laptop, and connected it to the TV on the wall that the restaurant used to display the seasonal menu. The screen lit up. First slide. 2 sets of books, side by side. On the left, the version Conrad had sent Grant, revenue steadily increasing. On the right, the real books, revenue 40% lower. 6 months. $30,000 to $50,000 each month flowing into Meridian Provisions, a supplier that didn't exist. Second slide. Tip distribution. Neil and Wesley, 75%. 6 people splitting 25%. Same hours worked. Third slide. 3 complaints. 3 signatures, reading Conrad Hale. 3 times stamped with, no action required. Fourth slide. Email transaction records from Tavola's basement. Shipping routes. VIP client lists. Security schedules. 43 emails over 8 months. All sent to the Petrov family. Conrad stood, his chair shoved back, its legs scraping against the tile floor. Grant, I can explain. This is, sit, down, 2 words. Grant's voice didn't rise. It dropped. And when Grant Valenti's voice dropped, everyone in the room understood that the distance between this moment and consequence was very, very short. Conrad sat. Grant looked at him. You ate at my father's table for 20 years. He trusted you with his restaurants, his money, his family's name. A pause. You sold our routes to the Petrovs. You sold our clients. You sold our security schedules. You turned this restaurant, the first thing my father built, into a pipeline feeding his enemies. Conrad opened his mouth. Grant didn't let him speak. 24 hours. You leave New York. After that, I can't guarantee what happens, and I won't try. Conrad looked around the table, looking for an ally. A nod, a sympathetic glance. There was none. 10 pairs of eyes looked at him, and not one looked away. He stood for the second time. This time, he took the suit jacket from the back of his chair and walked out. No words. The smell of his cologne lingered for another 10 seconds, then faded. Grant turned to Neil. And you? Neil looked up. For the first time, his eyes held something Grant had not seen there in the past 4 days. Real fear. You told my mother she didn't fit this room. Grant spoke slowly, every word clear. She built this room. Her name's on the lease. Her recipe is in every dish you've ever served, and you looked her in the eye and told her to leave. Margaret sat at the head of the table, looking at Neil. Not angry. Sad. Sad in the way of someone who had seen too many young people spoiled by power they never deserved. You don't get 24 hours, Grant said. You get nothing. No money, no name, no protection. You're done. Neil stood, his mouth opened, then closed. There was nothing to say when everything you had was built on someone else's foundation, and that foundation had just been pulled away. He walked out. Wesley watched Neil go. Then Wesley stood too, without being told, without being dismissed, and followed him. A shadow disappearing on its own when the light went out. The door closed. The room was 3 people emptier. The air was lighter, but it wasn't over. Grant was still standing, and he was looking at Kat. The door closed behind Wesley. The room went quiet again. Grant looked around the table. Petra understood. She stood, said softly, "I'll be in the kitchen," and walked out. 5 people remained. Grant, Kat, Margaret, Benny, Fletcher. 5 people in one long table, now more than half empty. Chairs pushed back, wine glasses still full, candles still burning. Grant didn't sit down. He walked to the end of the table where Fletcher was sitting, and Fletcher handed him a file. Not a polished leather folder, the kind used in business. An old stack of papers, yellowed at the edges, some pages photocopied, some printed from microfilm, the kind of file Fletcher had been forced to dig backward through 20 years to find, from police archives, from Big Sal's internal records, from files no one had opened since the day Frank Moran disappeared. Grant took the file, walked to Kat, and placed it in front of her, gently, as if he were setting down something both heavy and fragile. Fletcher spent the last 48 hours tracing the leak from 2006. Kat looked at the file. Didn't open it. Not yet. She looked at Grant, and in her eyes was something he recognized because he had seen it in the mirror 15 years earlier, when he had just inherited the empire, the fear of knowing the truth. Because the truth could be the thing you wanted, or it could be the thing that destroyed the very reason you had kept living. Grant continued, his voice low, unhurried. In 2006, 2 containers got seized at the Brooklyn port. Someone had leaked the shipping routes to the FBI. Your father was suspected. Conrad Hale brought the suspicion to my father. Conrad confirmed it. A pause. My father trusted Conrad. Your father was dead within 48 hours. Kat didn't react. She knew this part. She had lived with this part for 20 years. Fletcher traced the actual leak. Grant nodded toward Fletcher. Fletcher spoke in a lawyer's voice, precise, without one wasted word. The FBI seizure in 2006 was based on specific route information. Dates, container numbers, port schedules. Only 4 people had access to that level of detail. Frank Moran, Conrad Hale, your father, Sal, and Benny. Benny looked up from the end of the table. His eyes widened. The eyes of a man whose name had just been called in a story he thought he was only there to witness. Fletcher continued. I tracked the communication pattern between the FBI field office and their source. The source used a payphone on Atlantic Avenue. Call records show 11 calls over 3 months, all during Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. Fletcher opened one page in the file. Frank Moran worked Tuesday and Thursday mornings. He clocked out at 2 o'clock in the afternoon every Tuesday and Thursday. He was home in Flatbush by 3. Phone records from his landline confirm he was making calls home to his wife Diana between 2:30 and 3 every Tuesday and Thursday. A pause. He wasn't on Atlantic Avenue. He was in Flatbush, calling his wife. Fletcher turned another page. Conrad Hale's schedule in 2006, every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, from 1 to 4 o'clock, was blocked as supplier meetings. No supplier name, no address, no documentation. The same phantom supplier pattern he's been using at Tavola for the past 6 months with Meridian Provisions. Silence filled the room. The candles flickered. The leak was Conrad. It was always Conrad. In 2006, he fed routes to the FBI, probably to cut a deal for himself, to build leverage in case things went wrong. When the containers got seized, and your father started looking for the rat, Conrad pointed at Frank. The only non-Italian in the inner circle, the easiest to suspect, the hardest to defend. Fletcher closed the file. Your father believed Conrad. Frank Moran died for a betrayal he didn't commit. Kat opened the file. Her hands didn't shake. Not yet. She turned each page. Call records, schedules, diagrams. Each page was another brick in the wall she had spent 20 years trying to build with instinct and faith in her mother. And now the wall had a foundation. Concrete, proof. Her father was innocent, not because she believed it, because the data proved it. Grant reached into the pocket of his shirt and took out the second thing. The photograph. The photograph from Benny's kitchen shelf. Big Sal and Frank Moran, covered in flour, shoulder to shoulder, smiling, in the very kitchen just 10 steps away from where they were sitting. He placed the photograph in front of Kat, beside the file. Kat looked at it. Everything before this, the file, the proof, the schedules, the numbers, she had processed with her head. This photograph went straight into her chest. Her father, smiling, young, flour on his hands, on his cheek, on his apron, smiling the kind of smile she could still remember from that last morning when she was 7 years old, right before everything broke apart. Kat's finger touched her father's face in the photograph. Slowly, lightly, the touch of someone afraid that if she pressed too hard, the image would vanish the way he had vanished 20 years ago. The last time she saw her father smile, she was 7 years old. 20 years. For 20 years, all she had was the photograph of her father in the tin box under her bed. Old, small, faded. And now, here, in the restaurant where her father had once worked, she saw him smiling beside the friend he had called a brother, in the kitchen where he had belonged. Margaret stood, not quickly, slowly, the way a 63-year-old woman rises when every movement has purpose. She walked around the table, came to Kat's side, and placed a hand on her shoulder. Kat didn't look up. She was still looking at her father's photograph. Margaret spoke in a gentle voice. The kind of voice only people who have lost someone have. The kind of voice that knows no words are enough, but still speaks, because silence is worse. Your father made the best cantucci I ever tasted. He brought them to my kitchen every Christmas morning, 5 o'clock in the morning, before anyone else was awake. He'd knock twice, leave the box on the counter, and disappear before Sal woke up. A pause. I never forgot his hands, always covered in flour, even when he wore a suit. Kat broke, not loudly. One single sob, short, cut off by the hand she pressed over her mouth. Tears spilled through her fingers. Not crying from sadness. The kind of crying that comes from holding on too long. 20 years of holding. 20 years of swallowing. 20 years of reading. Don't forget. Don't forgive every night. And now someone remembered her father's hands. Someone remembered the flower on them. Someone remembered he had been a real person, not a name in a police file or a 3-line article in the corner of a page. Margaret held her, the arms of a 63-year-old woman wrapped around the shoulders of a 27-year-old girl, the wife of the man who ordered the killing, holding the daughter of the man who was killed. Inside the restaurant, both of those men had built together. And in that moment, no word was enough. No language could hold it. Benny stood in the kitchen doorway, a towel over his shoulder, his hands trembling, not because of age this time. He cried without sound. Tears ran down his wrinkled cheeks. He remembered Frank's hands kneading dough, better than Sal's, better than his own. He remembered Sal, remembered this kitchen when 3 men stood in it every morning instead of him standing there alone. Grant watched, standing still at the head of the table. His eyes were wet. For the first time in 15 years, he didn't turn away, didn't hide it. He let the tears stay there, on his face, because in this room, tonight, hiding anything would insult everything that had just been spoken aloud. Kat held the photograph and pressed it to her chest, both hands gripping it tightly, eyes closed. He was real. Her voice was small, broken at the edges, but clear. He was real, he was good, and he was here. Margaret kept her hand on Kat's shoulder. She looked at the photograph, her husband and Frank, smiling, covered in flour, 4 o'clock in the morning. He was family, Margaret said. He always was. 3 months later, Tavola still had the same red brick front, the same sign, the same glass door looking out onto the street in Little Italy. People passing by saw nothing different, but once they stepped inside, everything had changed. The first thing customers saw was the chalkboard beside the door, written by hand in white chalk. Kat's handwriting clear and neat. This season's menu, created by our team. Underneath, every dish came with a name. Not a code number, not a regional initiative, not the name of someone who had stolen it from somebody else. The real name of the person who created it. Sal's Sunday sauce, Benny Ferraro, original recipe. Benny's bruschetta, Benny Ferraro, Denver flagship. Katerina's Sunday tiramisu, Katerina Moran. Benny Ferraro returned as head of the kitchen. The jar labeled by hand, Sal's Sunday sauce, don't touch, still sat on the 3rd shelf in the refrigerator, exactly where it had always been. But now it wasn't a hidden relic. It was the heart of the menu. Benny cooked every day. The same recipe, the same 4 hours over low heat, the same patience Big Sal had taught him 40 years earlier, and he stepped out into the dining room whenever he wanted. No one banned him. No one told him he was too old. No one said he hurt the brand. Kat took the position of manager at Tavola. Grant offered it. She refused the first time. I didn't come here for a promotion. Grant waited. 1 week later, she called him back. Accepted, with one condition only. Nobody who walks through that door gets told they don't fit the room. Ever. I don't care what they're wearing, how old they are, or how much they're spending. If they're here, they belong here. Grant said nothing. He only nodded, because that was what his father had once believed, before everything was covered in the dust of power and men like Conrad. Kat hired 3 new employees to replace Neil, Wesley, and one person who had quit. The only standard she set during interviews was this: do you actually like people? All people? Not just the ones who look good or tip well? Petra stayed, promoted to assistant manager. She was the first one there every morning and the last one to check the door every night, alongside Kat. The first Sunday after everything changed, 7 o'clock in the morning, Tavola's door opened. Walt stepped in, slowly, old army jacket on his shoulders, his back a little more bent than it had been 3 months earlier. But his steps still steady, the steps of a man used to marching even when there was no battlefield left to reach. He stopped at the door, looked around. The way a man looks when checking whether a place is still safe, whether someone will tell him the table is reserved, whether someone will point him toward the seat beside the kitchen wall. A new employee, the young woman Kat had hired the week before, looked up from the counter and smiled. Rigatoni bolognese, extra parmesan, sparkling water, no ice. Walt, right? Walt stopped mid-step, looked at the young woman. He had never met her before. "How do you know my name?" "Kat told us about our VIPs. You're at the top of the list." Walt smiled. Short, surprised. The laugh of a man who had forgotten what it felt like to be expected somewhere, and had just remembered. He sat at the window table. His table. The table Neil had chased him away from. The table no one now dared call reserved when it was empty. When he left, he put a $5 bill into the tip jar on the counter, the ceramic jar Petra had placed there the week before. He tapped the side of the jar twice, the knock of a man happy that the door was open. "See you next Sunday, Kat." "See you next Sunday, Walt." Margaret came every Sunday. The same window table, across from Walt, each of them at a separate table, but in the same sunlight. She ordered tiramisu and black coffee. Read a book. No one asked who she was. No one needed to ask. She was a customer. And at Tavola, that was enough. On the wall, beside the chalkboard menu, 2 photographs hung side by side. On the left, Big Sal, 30 years old, standing in front of the first bakery, white apron, flour on his cheek, smiling. On the right, Big Sal and Frank Morin, covered in flour, shoulder to shoulder, smiling in Tavola's kitchen. The photograph from Benny's kitchen shelf, now in a new frame. Clean glass, placed where every customer could see it. A small sign underneath, handwritten in Margaret's hand. "Family isn't who you're born to, it's who you choose to feed." Night, after closing. Tavola was quiet, chairs stacked on tables, the espresso machine cooling, clicking softly like an engine after a long journey. Kat and Grant sat across from each other at the window table, Margaret's table. Between them, a plate of Cantucci. Kat had made them that afternoon, Frank Moran's recipe, the one Margaret had remembered and taught her. Flour, almonds, orange peel, baked twice until crisp. The same recipe Frank had brought to Margaret's kitchen every Christmas morning at 5 o'clock, knocking twice, leaving the box on the counter, disappearing before Sal woke up. Grant picked up a piece, bit into it, stopped. "This is my father's recipe. Your mother remembered it." Silence. The kind of silence that didn't need to be filled. Grant's hand, the hand that had signed Conrad's exile, the hand that had gripped the steering wheel in the dark for 4 straight nights, the hand that had held the photograph of 2 fathers while trembling, rested lightly on Kat's hand on the table. She didn't pull away, didn't hold on, just let it stay. 2 hands on the wood, beside the plate of Cantucci, beneath the streetlight falling through the glass door. 10 o'clock, Kat stood, wiped the table one last time, checked the kitchen, and turned off the lights. She took the key from the hook behind the counter and walked to the front door. Tavola was dark. Only the streetlight outside shone through the glass, falling across the window table, Margaret's table, Walt's table, the table Neil had once said no one deserved. The table now empty, clean, ready for tomorrow. Kat locked the door and slipped the key into her pocket, stepped onto the sidewalk. Grant leaned against the black car across the street, hands in his pockets, watching her, saying nothing. She crossed the street. They walked side by side through the New York night, past the smell of pizza from the corner shop, past taxi horns, past the red and yellow neon of restaurants that had not closed yet. No kiss, no declaration, no grand promise. Just 2 people walking in the same direction, shoulder near shoulder, in the city that never sleeps. "We eat at the same table," Kat said softly. Grant looked at her. "Or we don't eat at all. And maybe this story isn't only a story about the mafia, about a restaurant, or about an old woman being driven out of the place where she belonged. It is a story about something all of us have felt at least once in our lives. The feeling of walking into a room and being looked at as if you didn't deserve to be there. Being judged by your appearance, by your age, by your clothes, before you even had the chance to open your mouth and say a word. The greatest lesson this story leaves behind is not about power or revenge. It is about how we treat the people we think are unimportant. The waitress. The old man sitting alone. The elderly woman in an old coat. The person no one remembers by name. Because sometimes, the person you look down on is the one who owns the very building you are standing in. And sometimes, the person you forget is the only one who stands up to protect you when no one else bothers to open their mouth. Margaret teaches us that dignity does not depend on the clothes you wear. Katerina teaches us that kindness is stronger than hatred. Benny teaches us that devotion does not need anyone's recognition in order to exist. And Walt teaches us that everyone deserves a table where they are welcomed. If this story touched you, if you have ever been Margaret, told that you did not belong, or Katerina, standing up when no one else would, or even one of the 6 people who stood there watching and said nothing, I want to hear your story. Share it in the comments below. It doesn't have to be long. It only has to be true. Because every story told is one more way we remind one another that everyone deserves to be respected, to be seen, to be remembered by name. If you feel this story means something, press the like button so more people can find it. Share it with someone you think needs to hear it tonight. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next stories, because we bring you new stories every day. Stories that touch the heart and make you think about life in a different way. Thank you for being here, for listening until the very last minute. That means a great deal to us. We wish you and your family good health, a joyful life, and peace in every day. And remember, wherever you are, whoever you are, you always deserve a seat at the table. Goodbye, and see you again in the next video.